Tonight, we step into a story unlike any other. A story of betrayal, deception, and consequences no one saw coming. A family divided by wealth, a son with a plan, and a crime that spiraled far beyond its original intent. What truly happened behind closed doors? Was this about money, or something much deeper? Welcome. Stay with us, and prepare for a journey through secrets, choices, and the unexpected turns that led to a shocking outcome. This is a case that will leave you questioning everything. Wealth can be a symbol of success, a measure of hard work, a key to a life of comfort. But sometimes, it becomes something else. Something that divides rather than unites, something that fuels resentment, ambition, and desperation. A well-respected businessman had built his fortune over decades, creating an empire that would provide for generations to come. His family wanted for nothing, or so it seemed, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. The son, once the natural heir, felt overshadowed. The stepmother, seen by some as an outsider, played a role in a family dynamic that was far more complicated than it appeared. And then, there were the friends, young men with ambitions of their own, drawn in by the promise of something greater, something easy, something that should have been out of reach. A plan was formed, an idea turned into action. The stepmother was taken, a ransom demanded. The goal was simple. Fast money, no complications, no risks. But reality is never that neat. Decisions made in secrecy led to consequences none of them could control. What was meant to be a quick exchange ended in tragedy. A family already fractured was shattered beyond repair. What drove them to do it? Was this about inheritance, power, or something far more personal? Did they believe they could outsmart everyone around them? Or was this always destined to fail? The story that follows is not just about one event but about everything that led up to it. The relationships, the motives, the choices that turned an idea into a crime. This is a story of betrayal, greed, and unintended consequences. The father was a man who understood the value of hard work. From modest beginnings, he built a thriving business, turning an idea into an empire. His name became synonymous with success, his wealth growing year after year. Those who knew him described him as strategic, determined, and, above all, in control. But running a business and managing a family are two different things. While his professional life was carefully structured, his personal life was more complicated. He had been married before, a relationship that gave him a son, his only child, his presumed successor. But after the marriage ended, things changed. The son watched as his father remarried, bringing a new woman into the family. She was intelligent, poised, and, by all accounts, deeply devoted to her husband. To some, she was a partner, a supporter, a stabilizing presence in the businessman's life. To others, she was a barrier, someone who now had influence over the man who controlled everything. The relationship between the son and his stepmother was not warm. Some say it was polite but distant. Others claim there was quiet tension that never fully eased. Had the son accepted her, or had he always seen her as competition? There were whispers that the father's attention had shifted, that his plans for the future were no longer as clear as they once were. Then there were the friends. The son had surrounded himself with people who shared his frustrations, who understood his grievances, or at least listened to them. They came from different backgrounds, some privileged, others not, but all had their own reasons for wanting more. They talked about money, power, and opportunity. And in those conversations, an idea took shape. What started as a discussion soon became a plan. And once the plan was set in motion, there was no turning back. Ideas can be dangerous when they leave the realm of thought and take on a life of their own. What started as frustration soon turned into something more. A conversation between friends that slowly took shape into an organized plan. The son had spoken of money before, of what he believed was rightfully his. He knew his father's wealth, understood how it was structured, and had spent years watching from the sidelines. His friends listened. Some had their own financial struggles, others saw an opportunity too good to ignore. They convinced themselves it would be easy. No one would get hurt. It would be over before anyone knew what happened. The location was chosen carefully. a moment when she would be alone with no one watching. The execution was swift, rehearsed. They had studied her routine, knowing exactly where she would be and when. It happened in a quiet place, where she wouldn't be seen or heard. In just minutes, she was taken. A vehicle waiting nearby disappeared into the night. The demands were immediate. A ransom, a sum large enough to change their lives forever. The father received the message, clear, direct, without room for argument. There was no doubt in his mind about what had happened. The weight of his name, his wealth, his power, none of it mattered in that moment. His wife had been taken, and the only thing that mattered now was getting her back. He was given instructions, a deadline. Any misstep, any attempt to involve law enforcement, and there would be consequences. He was left with an impossible choice. Comply or risk losing the one person who had stood by him for years. Meanwhile, the captors believed they had everything under control. They were careful. No unnecessary calls. No mistakes. She was held in a place far from public view, hidden away while they waited for the exchange. But plans, no matter how carefully made, rarely unfold as expected. And this one was already beginning to slip away. The first few hours were critical. The father knew that every second counted, but he also understood the risk. He wanted his wife back, unharmed. The instructions were clear, no police, no questions, just the money. But he couldn't ignore a growing sense of doubt. Something about this wasn't right. Law enforcement became involved quietly. A select group of investigators working behind the scenes started piecing together the situation. Ransom cases are never simple, and this one was no exception. The first step was the phone. Every call, every message left a trace. Experts analyzed the communication, searching for patterns, location signals, background noise, any small detail that could provide a lead. Then came the money. The father's wealth meant that every financial transaction was monitored, recorded, scrutinized. The moment he was asked to prepare the payment, authorities were ready. They tracked the movements of his accounts, waiting to see where the demand would lead. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A quiet conversation, whispered in confidence, reached the wrong ears. Someone had heard something, fragments of a plan, a name mentioned too many times. It was enough. Investigators followed the thread, pulling at it until the entire plan began to unravel. It led them to a house, ordinary on the outside, but inside, they found the first real evidence. The vehicle used in the abduction. Traces of movement. A space that had been occupied recently, but was now empty. Then, the arrests. One by one, the son and his friends were found. Some tried to run, others stayed put, convinced they were still in control. But it was over. What they didn't realize was that the situation had already taken a turn they never expected. And the worst part of it all? The person they had taken was no longer with them. The moment everyone had feared arrived without warning. Authorities, following the trail of evidence, stumbled upon a discovery that turned a case of deception into something far more tragic. It was a secluded area, one that hadn't drawn much attention before. A place chosen carefully, hidden just enough to keep secrets. But secrets don't stay buried forever. A simple misstep, a search expanding beyond its original path, led investigators straight to what they had been dreading. Forensics moved in, carefully documenting every detail. The condition of the scene told a story, one of desperation, miscalculation, and regret. Experts examined the surroundings, noting every sign that could explain what had happened. Was this a planned act? A moment of panic that spiraled out of control? Or had something unexpected changed everything? The timeline was reconstructed piece by piece. Investigators traced the last moments of the stepmother's presence, the final movements before everything went silent. Communications were reviewed, locations analyzed. Every piece of information brought them closer to an unsettling truth. Meanwhile, the family was left in turmoil. The father, who had once believed this was just a crime for money, was now forced to confront a reality far worse. The weight of loss settled over the household, shrouding it in unanswered questions. The son, now in custody, had no choice but to face what he had set into motion. His friends, once confident in their plan, now carried the weight of a consequence they hadn't foreseen. And through it all, one thought remained. Was this the outcome they had intended, or had the situation spiraled beyond their control? The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled, every gaze fixed on the figures standing before the judge. The case had gripped the nation. A crime that had started as a scheme for money had ended with devastating consequences. Now, justice had to take its course. Charges were read aloud, each one adding weight to the already tense atmosphere. The son stood alongside his friends, their faces betraying the reality of their choices. The prosecution laid out its case with precision, presenting evidence collected over weeks of investigation. Phone records, financial transactions, and witness testimonies painted a picture of planning, deception, and an outcome none of them had prepared for. The defense took a different approach. Arguments were carefully crafted. Was this a case of intention, or had events unfolded in ways even they hadn't expected? The son's legal team emphasized regret, pointing to a plan that had not been meant to escalate the way it did. His friends' lawyers followed a similar path, each trying to shift the focus away from deliberate harm. Outside the courthouse, the public had already formed its own opinions. The media covered every moment, headlines dissecting each detail. Was this about greed? Was there something deeper at play? Opinions were divided. Some saw a calculated betrayal, while others believed it was reckless youth, unaware of the storm they had created. Inside, the trial continued. Testimonies from investigators, forensic experts, and even the father brought emotions to the surface. The family's pain was undeniable, their loss now a permanent reality. And through it all, the son and his friends sat in silence, waiting for the verdict that would decide their fate. The courtroom doors eventually closed. The verdict had been delivered, sentences handed down, and the weight of justice settled over those involved. But beyond the trial, beyond the headlines and public debates, deeper questions remained. This case was never just about a crime. It was about trust broken in the most painful way possible. A family, bound by blood and marriage, had been torn apart by greed, resentment, and choices that could never be undone. The stepmother, once a part of their home, was now a memory. The father, a man who had built a legacy, was left with heartbreak instead of the family he had worked so hard for. And the son, along with his friends, faced a future forever altered by their own actions. But this was not just a personal tragedy. It spoke to something larger, something that stretched beyond one household. The influence of wealth, the sense of entitlement, and the belief that money could solve everything had all played a role in what happened. Had the son felt overshadowed? Had his friends seen an opportunity in his frustrations? Had they ever stopped to consider the weight of their choices? Society often celebrates success, yet it rarely prepares people for the fractures it can create within families. Money can provide comfort, but it can also breed resentment. Relationships can appear strong on the surface while cracks grow underneath. And when those cracks go ignored, when emotions fester without resolution, the results can be irreversible. Justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but the lasting impact of this case could not be measured in years behind bars. It would live on in the sorrow of a father who had lost both a wife and a son in different ways. It would echo in the lives of those who had once been young, free, and full of potential but had thrown it away for a plan that had never truly been in their control. In the end, this case was a reminder, a warning. Betrayal does not always come from strangers, and once a line is crossed, there is no turning back.